If you think that abortion kills another human being, then you should be allowed to opt out, especially if you can make the case that scientifically that's what's going on. Okay? In fact, by the way, the law, generally speaking, does not allow you to kill another human being, even under the threat of lethal force. If you are being forced by somebody else to commit another crime and they are at gunpoint, you are exonerated for committing the crime under those circumstances unless it's taking another life. And you cannot be exonerated even though you're under lethal threat. You can't take that other life in that circumstance. But in this case, that's exactly what's happening. Abortion takes the life of an innocent human being, and not only are you not, well, as I'll show you, you're not necessarily free to opt out. You can be forced to do it, forced by the government or by let me back up. You can be forced by your employer to do it, and the government won't protect you. Now, many of you are thinking, wait a minute, I thought we already covered this ground. I thought the Congress unanimously passed a law that said if you have religious scruples about abortion, you cannot be forced to participate. And the answer to that is you're right. But just because a law is passed does not mean that a given administration is going to enforce it or respect it and respect your rights under that law. Which means then when that's not done, especially in a morally weighty issue like this, it's not like a cop, you're breaking the law, you're speeding, and the cop says, I'll let you off with a warning. Well, strictly speaking, he's not enforcing that law. But that's not like this. This is something different. This has to do with a basic human liberty, irrespective of your religious convictions. Yet when the law does not honor that, or let's say the executives who have a responsibility to adjudicate the laws passed to protect your basic human rights, when they don't enforce that law, we got a real problem, because that means the rule of law is not the rule in a country. That means that under certain circumstances, whoever is in power, who has the responsibility to enforce things, can just say, we don't care what the law says. It doesn't matter to us. Why? We have the power to do what we want. Now, I don't care what political party you're part of, what your political philosophy happens to be. That kind of thing is something that ought to be opposed by everybody. Because right now it's a Christian's ox that's being gored, but the same principle can be applied by others. Where truth doesn't matter, power is all that matters. And what I've written in Solid Ground, this would be the March, the March issue, the Primal Heresy, and I developed the ideas a little bit further in subsequent issues, that one of two fundamental forces are going to rule, either the force of truth or the force of power. If truth doesn't dictate how we live and how law is passed and enforced, then it's just going to be power. It's just going to be a raw exercise of power. And this is where it becomes appropriate to properly speak truth to the powers who ignore truth and ignore justice. I know that broader principle is a big deal right now in secular culture, but it is very narrowly applied in my view. And so I'm going to read this article by Roger Severino, and it speaks for itself. This coming from, oh my goodness gracious me, I'm sorry about the bib source. They have this thing where you don't have to print all the page with all the advertisements, but you can just ask for the content. But the content doesn't give the source. This is Roger Severino, August 3rd, this week ago. Don't hate me, in quotes. The piece starts. According to a lawsuit filed by the Department of Justice last year, that is what an abortionist at the University of Vermont Medical Center said to a nurse before she forced her to assist in the termination of a child's life on pain of losing her job and potentially her license if she refused. The nurse in the case had informed her bosses well beforehand that she could not participate in abortion because of her religious and moral convictions. And by the way, you notice I just mentioned that, frankly, it shouldn't matter whether she has religious convictions. It should only matter if she has personal moral convictions. That's all that's necessary. You don't have to make this a religious issue. Abortion kills a human being, period. End of issue. Plainly, it's the point. It's the purpose. It's why people get these procedures. It's an unborn human growing and growing and growing and causing a problem. And the only solution is to kill that growing human being. That someone might have scruples about doing that, why is that considered unusual? In any event, she had informed her boss, and I continue with the piece. Her right to such a demurrer, refusal, is protected by federal law, known as the Church Amendments, which Congress passed unanimously in direct response to Roe v. Wade. The facts were stunning in their clarity. The victim was extremely credible and sympathetic, and the violator remained entirely callous and unrepentant. The UVMMC, that would be the University of Vermont Medical Center, Matter was the most open and shut conscience case in over a decade. I say was because Friday, the DOJ, that would be Department of Justice, that means the people who have the power to prosecute or not. The DOJ quietly and voluntarily dismissed the case. No admission of guilt. I mean, this is the case that the nurse brought against the UVMMC. You violated the law, not just my rights in some general sense in how you interpret the First Amendment. It's the explicit law on the books unanimously passed by Congress. Dismissed. No admission of guilt, no injunction, no corrective action, no settlement, no nothing. Worse yet, because the victim has few to no options to sue on her own, and that's due to nuances around private rights of action. The current administration is effectively giving the UVMMC a full pardon and will continue to give it federal funds, despite it having been found by HHS, House and Human Services, to have violated Health and Human Services, rather, to have violated the law. They violated the law egregiously. No matter. No big, whatever. No, you just keep going. Don't hate me, indeed, the text says. After Roe v. Wade, the medical profession split in a way that Harry Blackman, the author of Roe, did not expect. He imagined that women would obtain abortions with the guidance of her physician in respected hospitals and medical practices all over the country, excepting those run by religious institutions. Instead, the medical profession, rightly fearing for its reputation, offloaded abortion work to the legions of abortion clinics that began to spring up like McDonald's, but without the smile all across the country. To the average American today, there are doctors and there are abortionists, and overwhelmingly medical professionals do not want to be identified with the latter. And they go on to say every year thousands of medical professionals quietly decline to train in or assist or perform or refer to abortions for a simple reason. They enter the practice of medicine to save lives, not to end them. After all, who wants to put on their resume that they abort products of conception all day long for a living? Okay. And this explains in part why big abortion is desperate to eliminate conscience protections for medical professionals that have been in place for decades. because it helps their bottom line to have more people complicit in this sordid business. And, of course, the President administration, they go on to say in this article, is cooperating with the abortion industry in that regard, regardless of what the law says. Though, the article continues, the nurse victim here of UVMC's malfeasance was deeply traumatized. She mustered the courage to file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights at HHS, which is responsible for enforcing our nation's many conscience protection laws. Now, this writer here, I mentioned Roger Severino, says, I was director of the OCR at the time and ordered an investigation by the office's Conscience and Religious Freedom Division, which was founded precisely to handle cases such as these. The division's career professionals, with assistance from career attorneys at the Office of General Counsel, issued findings of violation against the hospital, which led directly to a lawsuit by the DOJ to enforce compliance with the law. In other words, they realized their job. Here's this woman who is abused in her rights, and she brings it for the proper authorities, which sees this as a legitimate case of violation and does what they are told to do, fulfills their obligations to present a case to protect in response to this woman's violated rights. This is their job. And he said, we did it. For those unaware, Becerra, who I guess is, he is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, all right, under the current administration. Becerra may be the most notorious violator of conscience laws of recent years. He even lost a Supreme Court case with his name on it, NIFLA versus Becerra, after he tried to coerce pro-life pregnancy resource centers into violating their consciences by forcing them to refer mothers in search of life-affirming alternatives to free abortion services. Oh, you're pro-life? Oh, well, that's okay. But women who come to you, you've got to recommend the abortions for them. I mean, can you see how bizarre that is? But this is part of the squeeze of the power of people in power. Well, he lost that case. Becerra was twice found in violations of conscience protection laws by HHS's Conscience and Religious Freedom Division, but now he is in charge of the entire agency. The fox is running the henhouse. Seeing this looming conflict of interest, lawmakers have rightly questioned Becerra's commitment to conscience enforcements across many hearings. I don't want to read all this stuff against Becerra because he's just one cog in the wheel. The point I'm making here is that he and the administration that he represents has no interest in upholding the law on this issue. Apparently, he said, we will continue to provide protections for the civil constitutional rights of all Americans, including those that involve religion, and so nothing there changes. Well, the writer says here, it was a lie, all of it, because he acted contrary to that, what he said. And Congress, the piece continues, must hold him, Congress. Okay, let me pause for a moment. Think about it. Congress. Who runs Congress? Well, the people who run Congress, they're on his side. So, the writer says, Congress must hold him accountable for it. I cannot understate how unusual it is for the DOJ and the HHS to drop a duly authorized lawsuit after it has been investigated and filed while getting literally nothing in return. The government strenuously avoids doing such things because it calls into question the consistent expectations of the law, reeks of politics, and exposes the government to potential liability for attorney's fees under the Equal Access to Justice Act. The writer is saying, why would a government drop this thing when it exposes them to all of these counteractions for their irresponsible and illegal behavior? Nevertheless, they did it. He continues, without so much as a slap on the wrist, this was a clear favor to the abortion special interests and a spit in the face of not only the victim in the case, but the many medical professionals who have suffered conscience violations through the years and will continue to suffer, but now with little hope of recourse from the government. So there are excesses in the abuse of power, and legislators then pass laws that explicitly are meant to protect people in this circumstance. And when there is an explicit and egregious violation of those laws, the current DOJ will not prosecute. All right. HHS, he closes here, issued formal findings of violation against UVMMC after a thorough investigation. It simply cannot continue to fund a violator of the law that refuses to agree to come into compliance. Becerra should know this principle well because he was the California Attorney General when the HSS disallowed $200 million of Medicaid funds to the state for forcing people to buy abortion insurance contrary to federal conscience protection laws. There he is again. Even the Obama administration entered into a corrective action agreement with a hospital that had forced a nurse to assist in an abortion. We now know, if there was ever any doubt, that the current administration's first loyalty is not to the law, he closes, but to abortion. And abortion. And more abortion. His final words. This ought to cause a cold chill to run up the spine of every person who learns of this. Irrespective of your own views, the only way anyone is protected by anything regarding their individual rights is because of the rule of law. And when one group in power feels they have the freedom to ignore the rule of law and do whatever their little old heart desires, that's trouble for us all. Because now, administrations change, and if this becomes the way that we can operate, then what happens when the other side is in power, so to speak, and then it is the pro-aborts ox that gets gored? I'll tell you what's going to happen. It's the same thing that they've done before. They're going to scream about their rights and about the Constitution. But when it's the other side's rights that are being ignored, and not just some generalized right, some controversial decision by a Supreme Court in 1973, but when there's an explicit violation of a federal law that was passed unanimously, not that that really matters, as long as it was passed, it's law, that's being ignored, then where's the outcry? Where's the cry for justice? Social justice warriors should be screaming bloody murder. But social justice is not about social justice. It's about a particular ideology that's in favor now. And if it's not their ox being gored, then they don't care who gets gored. And this is just one example of that.